history feels neat. We put it in timelines. The Bronze Age here, the Iron Age there, Romans, then Vikings, then the Renaissance, everything in its proper box. But sometimes, like, archaeologists dig up something that just doesn't fit. A piece of the puzzle from the wrong box entirely. Imagine finding a smartphone in an Egyptian tomb. Or a stainless steel fork buried deep in a medieval castle. These are called out-of-place artifacts, or Ooparts. They are things that appear in places and time periods where they just shouldn't exist. They challenge our neat little timelines. They whisper about lost technologies, forgotten knowledge, or even visitors from other times and places. Are they proof of ancient genius we've underestimated? Are they elaborate hoaxes? Or are they just simple objects we've completely misunderstood? The answers are never easy, but the questions they raise can change how we see the past. Number 16, was there a spark plug inside a 500,000-year-old rock? The story begins in February 1961. Three friends, Wallace Lane, Virginia Maxey, and Mike Mikesell, were out looking for geodes near Olancha, California. They ran a gift shop and were always on the hunt for interesting rocks to sell. On this trip, they found something very strange. It looked like a geode, a hollow rock with crystals inside. But when Mikesell cut it open with a diamond saw, there were no crystals. Instead, there was a perfectly circular object made of white porcelain. In the center of the porcelain was a tiny shaft of shiny metal. A small piece of copper was also found corroding around the object. The whole thing was encased in hardened clay, sand, and pebbles. And it looked exactly like a spark plug. This was a problem. A spark plug is a modern invention, a key part of the internal combustion engine. Finding one inside what they thought was a 500,000-year-old geode was impossible. The story got out. A geologist they consulted, whose name has been lost to time, allegedly dated the rock's outer crust to 500,000 years old. The artifact became a sensation in magazines that covered mysteries and the paranormal. It was called the Coso Artifact, named after the Coso mountain range where it was found. For believers in ancient, high-tech civilizations or time travel, this was solid proof. A 500,000-year-old spark plug couldn't be explained by conventional history. The artifact was even displayed in their museum for a while. X-rays were taken, which seemed to show a tiny spring or helix at one end, adding to the mystery. It looked even more like a complex manufactured object. The owners refused to let anyone break it open further to see what was inside. Then, over the years, the Coso artifact just disappeared. Wallace Lane died, and the object's location is now unknown. But the story didn't die with him. It lived on, like a classic tale of an impossible find. But then, investigators started digging into the details, not the ground. Two researchers, Pierre Stromberg and Paul V. Heinrich, took a closer look at the claims. They couldn't examine the artifact itself, but they could examine the story. They started asking simple questions. Was it really a 500,000-year-old geode? Geodes don't form like this. The outer casing was hardened mud and rock, something called a concretion. Concretions can form much, much faster than geodes, sometimes in just a few decades. So the 500,000-year age was the first thing to fall apart. There was no proof of it. What about the spark plug itself? Stromberg and Heinrich contacted the spark plug collectors of America. They showed them the photos and x-rays of the Coso artifact. The collectors identified it immediately. It wasn't some unknown ancient technology. It was a 1920s era champion spark plug. This type of plug was widely used in Ford Model T and Model A engines. The Coso mountain range, where the artifact was found, was once a busy mining area in the 1920s and 30s. There was old, abandoned mining equipment all over the place. So the mystery started to look a lot less mysterious. A 1920s spark plug was likely dropped on the ground. Over the next 40 years, wet clay and other sediments washed over it. The iron and other metals in the spark plug rusted, and this rusting process helped cement the surrounding mud and sand into a hard, rock-like shell. A concretion. It wasn't ancient at all, it was just a piece of old trash that got a very unusual burial. The geologist who supposedly dated it was never named, so that claim couldn't be verified. The refusal to have the object properly examined or broken apart also made sense if the owner suspected it might not be what they hoped it was. Its disappearance means we can't be 100% certain, but the evidence against it being an ancient artifact is overwhelming. The Coso artifact isn't a story about ancient technology. It's a story about how easily we can be fooled by our own assumptions and how a good mystery can be more appealing than a simple, boring truth. What do we still not know? Why did the original owners seem so resistant to having the object properly studied if they believed it was genuine? If it was just a spark plug, like, why did the x-rays appear to show a tiny spring, a feature not present in the 1920s champion plugs? And with the artifact now lost, will its legend continue to grow, forever immune to the final, definitive test that could settle the debate once and for all? Number 15, did a Texan find a prehistoric hammer? In June 1936, a couple named Max and Emma Hahn were walking along a creek near London, Texas. They noticed a strange rock with a piece of wood sticking out of it. It looked odd, so they took it home. They left it in their garden for years. Over a decade later, their son broke the rock open with a hammer and chisel. Inside, they found what looked like an old-fashioned hammerhead. The hammerhead was made of a very pure iron. The wooden handle it was attached to seemed to have turned to coal in some parts. This became known as the London Hammer. The real mystery came from the rock it was found in. The rock was a concretion, similar to the Coso Artifact's casing, but the rock layers in that area of Texas are from the Cretaceous period. That means they are over 65 million years old, from the time of the dinosaurs. A modern-style hammerhead embedded in rock that old is, to put it mildly, impossible. The story was picked up by Carl Baugh, a creationist who believes the Earth is only a few thousand years old. He bought the hammer in the 1980s and made it the centerpiece of his Creation Evidence Museum in Texas. For Baugh and his followers, the London Hammer is proof that the geologic timeline taught by science is wrong. They claim it proves humans and dinosaurs lived at the same time. Baugh's museum claims the hammerhead is made of a strange alloy. They say it's 96.6% iron, 2.6% chlorine, and 0.74% sulfur. The lack of carbon is significant. Modern iron and steel making always leaves some carbon in the final product. The presence of chlorine is also very odd. It's not a normal part of any iron alloy. This unusual composition, they argue, shows it's not a modern tool. They also claim that the iron shows no signs of rust after all these years, suggesting some kind of advanced ancient metallurgy. The wooden handle was supposedly tested, but the results have been kept private, adding to the speculation. But scientists who have looked at the evidence tell a very different story. First, the rock. Like the Coso Artifact, the hammer was in a concretion, not a solid layer of Cretaceous rock. Geologist John Cole studied the hammer and the rock it came in. He pointed out that minerals in the local water can dissolve and then redeposit around an object, forming a hard rock-like shell. This process can happen in years or decades, not millions of years. The original rock may be ancient, but the concretion that formed around the hammer is not. A miner could have dropped his hammer in a crack in the rock, and water and minerals did the rest over time. What about the hammer itself? The design is not ancient. It's a common type of miner's or blacksmith's hammer from the late 19th century. The area around London, Texas was used for mining. Finding an old tool there is not surprising. The strange metal composition is also questionable. The tests were done at a single lab, Battelle Laboratory, but the full report has never been made public. We only have Carl Baugh's summary of it. Other experts have pointed out that chlorine is common in the soil and water of the area. It could have easily contaminated the hammer head over time, and the claim that it's rust-free is simply not true. And photos show clear signs of rust and oxidation on the hammerhead. It's an old iron hammer, and it's behaving exactly like an old iron hammer should. The coalified handle is also likely just wood that has been waterlogged and stained black by minerals over a long period. It's not true coal. The London Hammer is a classic Oopart. It has a great story, a seemingly impossible context, and a dedicated promoter who uses it to push a specific agenda. But under scrutiny, every piece of the mystery falls apart. It's almost certainly a 19th century miner's hammer that was dropped, and nature created a convincing but false ancient context around it. It's a powerful example of how a very ordinary object can become extraordinary if you ignore the most likely explanation. What questions remain? Why has the full lab report on the hammer's metallurgy never been released to the public for independent review? Without access to the original artifact for new, transparent testing, can we ever be completely sure of its composition and origin? And how does an object's story, especially when tied to deeply held beliefs, become more powerful than the physical evidence itself? Number 14 was a modern vase blasted out of 600 million year old rock. In 1852, a story appeared in the magazine Scientific American. It was a short, strange report about a discovery in Dorchester, Massachusetts. A group of miners were blasting rock to clear a site for a new building. After a particularly powerful blast, they found the two pieces of a metal vase that had been blown apart. The vase was bell-shaped, about 4.5 inches high. It was made of a zinc-silver alloy, and it had beautiful, detailed engravings on the side. The engraving showed a bouquet of flowers inlaid with pure silver. The problem was where it was found. The miners claimed it was embedded in solid pudding stone rock, which had been buried 15 feet below the surface. The pudding stone in that area, known as the Roxbury conglomerate, is dated to be about 600 million years old. A metallic, finely crafted vase from a time before even the simplest multicelled organisms existed on Earth is a complete impossibility. The story was a minor sensation at the time. It was reprinted in other newspapers and magazines. It became a piece of evidence for those who questioned the standard models of geology and history. How could a man-made object of such obvious skill be found in rock that was formed hundreds of millions of years before humans were supposed to exist? It was a direct challenge to science. The object became known as the Dorchester Pot. For over a century, the story was repeated in books about unexplained mysteries. The problems with the story, however, are huge. First, the source of the entire tale is a single, short article in a magazine from 1852. The article itself is based on the word of the miners who found the object. There were no archaeologists or geologists on the scene to verify the claim. We have to take their word for it that the vase was truly inside the solid rock. Eyewitness testimony, especially from over 150 years ago, is notoriously unreliable. It's very possible they found the vase in the rubble after the blast and just assumed it came from inside the rock. It could have been buried in the soil on top of the rock and fallen into the blast crater. Second, let's look at the object itself. A metal vase with silver floral inlays sounds a lot like something from the Victorian era. In fact, its style is very consistent with decorative objects made in the 1850s, the exact time it was found. Archaeologists and historians who have looked at the drawing of the vase see nothing ancient or mysterious about it. It looks like a candlestick holder or a pipe holder from that period. It's not an unknown technology. It's a typical piece of 19th century craftsmanship. The biggest blow to the mystery, however, came from researchers who pointed out that the object probably wasn't a vase at all. It was most likely part of what was known as an Indian pipe. Specifically, it looks like a holder for a hookah or water pipe, which were popular decorative items imported from the East during that time. This makes perfect sense. Someone in Dorchester in the mid-19th century owned this pipe holder. It got lost or thrown away and was buried in the dirt. When the miners set off their blast, it was blown out of the ground along with all the other rocks and debris. They found it, were amazed, and a legend was born. Like the Coso Artifact and the London Hammer, the Dorchester Pot is almost certainly a modern object that was found in a confusing context. The explosive nature of its discovery made it impossible to know for sure where it came from. But the simplest explanation is that it was a contemporary object lost and then found. There is no reliable evidence it was ever embedded in 600 million year old rock. The vase, like so many other Ooparts, has also conveniently disappeared, so no modern testing can be done on it. The story survives, but the evidence does not. So, what do we still wonder? Could a powerful blast truly fuse a modern object into a piece of ancient rock, making it look like it was always there? Without the original object, can we do anything more than just speculate based on a single 170-year-old drawing? And how many historical mysteries are based entirely on unverified, secondhand newspaper reports from a time when fact-checking was not a priority? Number 13, did an ancient civilization build a metal pipe system inside a mountain? In the remote Qinghai province of China, there is a strange mountain called Mount Baigong. Near the mountain are two lakes, one saltwater and one freshwater. And on this mountain, there is a small, pyramid-shaped peak with 3 caves. The caves are filled with something that makes no sense. Sticking out of the rock are dozens of metal pipes. They range in size from a toothpick to over a foot in diameter. They run deep into the mountain, some visibly plunging into the rock floor. Some of the pipes are also found on the shore of the nearby saltwater lake. They are all a reddish-brown color, like rusted iron. This bizarre network of pipes is known as the Baigong Pipes. The story first gained attention in 2002 after a team of scientists went to investigate. Samples of the pipes to be analyzed. The analysis, done by the state-run Xinhua agency, found that the pipes were mostly iron oxide with a high amount of silicon dioxide and calcium oxide. Interestingly, they also found that 8% of the material in the pipes could not be identified. This led to wild speculation. Local legends sprung up about a visit from extraterrestrials. The area was even promoted as an ET relic site to attract tourists. The head of the local publicity department, a man named Ye Kexin, said the pipes were clearly man-made and that their advanced nature suggested alien origins. The idea was that aliens built some kind of base or structure on the mountain thousands of years ago. The age of the pipes was another part of the mystery. Scientists used a technique called thermoluminescence to date the surrounding rock. This method measures the last time a material was heated. The results suggested the rock was last heated about 140,000 to 150,000 years ago. And if the pipes were made at the same time, that would put them deep in the Paleolithic era, a time when humans were using simple stone tools, not building complex iron pipe systems. This massive discrepancy is the heart of the Baigong Pipes mystery. Either our understanding of early human history is completely wrong, or these are not man-made pipes. Most scientists lean towards the second option. Geologists who have studied the phenomenon have proposed a natural explanation. They suggest the pipes are not pipes at all, but a rare geological formation. The theory is that this area was once rich in iron-filled sediment. This sediment washed into cracks and fissures in the existing rock. Over millions of years, geological processes could have caused the iron to leach out and solidify into hard, tube-like shapes, forming concretions. The softer sediment inside the tubes might have then washed away, leaving hollow pipes. Another theory suggests that the pipes are fossilized tree roots or reed stems. In this scenario, ancient trees grew in the area. Their roots penetrated the soft ground. Over time, iron-rich minerals in the water seeped into the root cavities, creating a perfect cast of the root system. When the organic material rotted away, the iron cast was left behind, looking exactly like a network of pipes. This natural explanation accounts for all the strange facts. It explains why the pipes are made mostly of iron oxide. It explains their tube-like shape and their presence both inside the mountain and near the lake. And it explains their apparent great age. They aren't 150,000-year-old technology. They are 150,000-year-old fossils or geological formations. The one identified 8% of material is also not that unusual in geological samples, which can contain a wide variety of trace minerals. The Baigong Pipes are a powerful reminder that nature can sometimes create things that look incredibly artificial. Our brains are wired to see patterns and intention, so when we see a network of tubes, we think plumbing. But sometimes a pipe is just a rock. Still, some questions linger. If these are fossilized roots, why are they so uniform in shape and seemingly organized in their layout? Could the high silicon content be evidence of a smelting process that used local sand, a process far beyond the known capabilities of Paleolithic humans? And what about the local legends of ancient sky people? Are they just modern inventions for tourists, or could they be a folk memory of something real that happened on that mountain long ago? Number 12. Did the Parthians invent the electric battery 1,500 years before Volta? In 1936, workers digging a new railway near Baghdad in modern-day Iraq uncovered an ancient tomb. Inside were artifacts from the Parthian Empire, which ruled the area from around 250 BC to 224 AD. Among the usual pottery and beads, there was a small, strange object. It was a clay jar about 5 inches tall. Inside the jar was a cylinder made of a sheet of copper, and inside the copper cylinder, held in place by an asphalt plug, was a small iron rod. The iron rod showed signs of being corroded by some kind of acidic liquid, like vinegar or wine. The object became known as the Baghdad Battery. In 1938, Wilhelm Koenig, a German archaeologist and the director of the National Museum of Iraq, was the first to suggest what it might be. He looked at the 3 components: an iron rod, the negative electrode, a copper cylinder, the positive electrode, and a space for an acidic liquid, the electrolyte. He realized that if you put all these things together, you have a galvanic cell. You have a simple battery. He published a paper suggesting that this 2,000-year-old jar was capable of producing a small electric current. To prove it, modern replicas of the Baghdad battery have been built using grape juice as an electrolyte. They produce a small but measurable voltage, typically around half a volt to 1 volt. This discovery was shocking. The The invention of the battery is credited to the Italian physicist Alessandro Volta in the year 1800. Finding a working battery from the Parthian era would mean that ancient people understood the principles of electricity almost 2 millennia earlier than we thought. It would rewrite the history of science. The question immediately became, if they had batteries, what did they use them for? One popular theory is that they were used for electroplating, the process of coating one metal with a thin layer of another. For example, they could have used them to plate silver onto copper jewelry. There is some evidence of electroplated artifacts from ancient Mesopotamia which would support this idea. Another theory, proposed by the German Egyptologist Arne Egebrecht, is that the batteries were used for a kind of mild electroacupuncture. He demonstrated that connecting several Baghdad batteries together could produce a noticeable tingling sensation. He suggested that ancient priests or healers might have used this magic to impress people or for therapeutic purposes. The TV show Mythbusters even tested the idea. They connected 10 replica Baghdad batteries and confirmed they could produce a definite tingling feeling, lending some credibility to the medical or religious use theory. However, many archaeologists and historians are skeptical. They argue that there is no other evidence of electrical knowledge from that period. There are no wires, no light bulbs, no devices of any kind that would use a battery. Why invent a power source if you have nothing to power? They also point out that the Baghdad battery is a one-of-a-kind find. If this technology was common, we should have found hundreds of them, not just one or two ambiguous jars. The mainstream explanation is much simpler. They argue the jars were not batteries at all. They were simply storage vessels for sacred scrolls. The copper cylinder would have been a protective case for a papyrus or parchment scroll. The iron rod could have been a spindle around which the scroll was wrapped. The asphalt plug would have sealed the jar, protecting the delicate scroll inside from the elements. Over time, the organic scroll material would have completely rotted away, leaving only the metal and clay components. The acidic residue could have come from the decomposing papyrus itself. This explanation is much less exciting, but it fits the archaeological context better. We have found other sealed jars from that period that were used for storing documents. So, was it a revolutionary piece of ancient technology or just a fancy scroll holder? The truth is, we don't know for sure. The object is simple enough to have multiple possible uses. Without more evidence, like a clear instruction manual or other related electrical artifacts, the Baghdad battery remains a fascinating puzzle. But the questions are compelling. If they were just scroll jars, why the specific combination of iron and copper, the two key metals needed for a battery? Could the knowledge of electricity have been a closely guarded secret of a priestly class? Which is why we don't find widespread evidence of it. And is it possible that a simple, profound discovery was made 2,000 years ago, only to be completely lost and forgotten, forcing humanity to rediscover it all over again centuries later? Number 11. Was a 4,000-year-old Egyptian artifact a model of a working glider? In 1898, a French archaeologist named Victor Loret was excavating a tomb in Saqqara, Egypt. The tomb belonged to an official named Pa-di-Emen and dated back to around 200 BC. Among the many artifacts found, there was a small, strange wooden object. It was about 6 inches long with a 7-inch wingspan. It had a bird-like body, straight wings, and a tail fin that was different from any known bird. It didn't have legs, and it didn't have the detailed feathers you usually see on Egyptian bird carvings. The object was labeled as a wooden bird model and sent to the Cairo Museum, where it sat in a box, mostly forgotten, for almost 70 years. Then, in 1969, a man named Dr. Khalil Masiha, an Egyptologist and a model airplane enthusiast, was looking through the museum's collection. He stumbled upon the Saqqara bird. He immediately noticed that it looked much more like a modern airplane than an ancient bird. The wings were shaped like an airfoil, curved on the top and flat on the bottom, which is the exact shape needed to generate lift. The tail fin looked more like a rudder than a bird's tail, and the lack of legs made it an impractical model of a perching bird. Dr. Messiah became convinced that it wasn't a bird at all. He believed it was a scale model of a working glider. He built a replica of the Saqqara bird out of balsa wood to test his theory. He found that with the addition of a horizontal tailplane, which he believed the original artifact was missing, the model could fly. It sailed through the air like a modern glider, stable and efficient. This was a radical idea. The Wright brothers made their first flight in 1903. If Masiha was right, the ancient Egyptians understood the principles of aerodynamics over 2,000 years earlier. They may have been building and flying full-size gliders. The Saqqara bird could be the only surviving evidence of a forgotten age of Egyptian aviation. The theory gained a lot of public attention. It fit into a growing narrative of ancient astronauts and lost high technology. Proponents pointed to other clues, like Egyptian hieroglyphs that some people interpret as depicting airplanes and helicopters. The Saqqara bird was seen as the missing piece of physical evidence. They argued that the Egyptians were brilliant engineers who built the pyramids. Why couldn't they have also conquered the air? The object's weight and balance were also said to be perfect for flight. However, most Egyptologists and aeronautical engineers disagree with this theory. They point out several major problems. First, the wings are not perfect airfoils. They have some curve, but it's not consistent or precise enough for efficient flight. More importantly, the model is inherently unstable. Without a horizontal tailplane or elevator, it would tumble out of the air. Dr. Messiah had to add one to his replica to make it fly. But there is no evidence that the original artifact ever had one. There's no broken slot or attachment point where one might have been. You have to modify the artifact to make the theory work. So what is it if not a glider? The mainstream explanation is much more down to earth. It's likely a ceremonial object or a high-end children's toy. The most plausible theory is that it's a kind of specialized boomerang or a weather vane. The hole in the front of the body could have been for a rotating spindle, allowing it to turn in the wind on top of a mast, perhaps on one of the sacred boats used in religious festivals. This would explain its aerodynamic shape without requiring it to be a true glider. It was designed to interact with the wind, but not to fly freely. We know the Egyptians had toys with moving parts, so a sophisticated toy bird is not out of the question. The Saqqara bird is a perfect example of how our modern perspective can influence our interpretation of the past. We live in an age of aviation, so when we see something with wings, we think airplane. But to an ancient Egyptian, it might have represented something completely different, a god, a symbol, or just a clever toy. Without more context, its true purpose remains a mystery. What puzzles us still? If it was a weather vane, why is it the only one of its kind ever found? Why does it lack the typical artistic detail of other Egyptian ceremonial objects from that period? And while it may not be a perfect glider, could it represent a very early, experimental understanding of aerodynamics, a first step on a technological path that was ultimately abandoned and forgotten? Number 10. Did the ancient Egyptians have electric lights in their tombs? Or deep inside the Temple of Hathor, at Dendera, Egypt, there's some very unusual carvings. On the walls of a dark underground crypt, you can see a large, elongated object that looks like a giant light bulb. Inside this bulb, a long, wavy snake is shown emerging from a lotus flower. The bulb is attached to a base, which looks like a socket, and running from this socket is a long cable or cord, which seems to connect to a box or generator. Standing next to this device are human figures, some of whom seem to be tending to it. These carvings are known as the Dendera light. For fringe theorists and proponents of ancient advanced technology, these images are a smoking gun, as they argue that the carvings are a literal depiction of an electrical device. The bulb is a glass tube, the snake is the filament, the lotus flower is the socket, and the cable is a power cord. They ask a simple question: how did the Egyptians work in the deep pitch black tombs and temples? The official explanation is that they used torches or oil lamps, but the ceilings of these tombs show no soot or smoke residue, which you would expect from thousands of hours of burning torches. The other theory is that they used a complex system of mirrors to reflect sunlight deep into the tombs. This is possible, but it would be very difficult and inefficient. The ancient electricity theory offers a clean solution. If the Egyptians had electric lights, they could have worked in the tombs without leaving any soot. The Dendera carving, they say, is the instruction manual. Some have even built working plasma bulbs called Crookes tubes that look remarkably similar to the Dendera carvings. When electricity is passed through these low-pressure glass tubes, the gas inside glows and the plasma forms a snake-like, wavy pattern, just like the snake in the hieroglyph. This visual similarity is the strongest piece of evidence for the theory. The box the cable connects to is interpreted as a generator, perhaps a scaled-up version of the Baghdad battery. However, Egyptologists and mainstream scientists have a very different interpretation. They see the images not as a technical diagram, but as a complex piece of religious symbolism. In Egyptian mythology, the creation of the world involved the sun god emerging from a primeval lotus flower. The snake is a symbol of fertility and creation, often associated with the god Harsamtis, who is born from the lotus. The bulb is not a glass tube, but the protective womb of the sky goddess Nut. The entire scene is a mythological representation of the birth of the sun and the creation of the universe. Every element of the carving has a known symbolic meaning in Egyptian religion. The socket is a lotus flower, a common symbol of creation. The cable is a stylized representation of the primeval waters from which the lotus grows. The figures are gods and priests performing a religious ritual. The jade pillar, which is also part of the scene and sometimes interpreted as an electrical insulator, is a well-known symbol of the backbone of the god Osiris, representing stability. The lack of soot in the tombs can also be explained. They could have used high-quality olive oil lamps, which produce very little smoke. Or they could have simply cleaned the soot off the ceilings periodically. Or the mirror theory, while difficult, is not impossible. The Dendera light controversy is a classic case of seeing what you want to see. If you're looking for evidence of lost technology, you see a light bulb. If you're an expert in Egyptian mythology, you see a creation story. The problem for the electricity theorists is that there is no other supporting evidence. We have found no bulbs, no wires, no filaments, no generators. All we have is one ambiguous carving, which has a perfectly reasonable explanation within the context of ancient Egyptian beliefs. The entire theory rests on a visual resemblance, which is not strong evidence on its own. But the questions won't go away. If they used oil lamps, even clean ones, wouldn't some trace of soot remain after thousands of years? Can a system of mirrors really illuminate the deepest, most complex tombs with enough light to create intricate art? And while the carving has a mythological explanation, is it possible that the myth itself was inspired by a real forgotten technology that seemed like magic to later generations? Number 9 were these 1,000-year-old gold trinkets, models of jet airplanes. In the Gold Museum in Bogota, Colombia, there is a collection of small, fascinating gold objects. They were made by the Quimbaya civilization, which lived in the region around 1000 AD. These objects, usually only about 2 inches long, are officially labeled as zoomorphic figures, meaning they are stylized representations of animals. They have the heads of birds, the tails of fish, and the bodies of insects. For decades, they were seen as nothing more than beautiful examples of pre-Columbian art. But in the late 20th century, some people started looking at them with a different eye. They noticed that some of these figures didn't look like any known animal. They looked like modern airplanes. These specific objects, often called the Quimbaya airplanes or the Tolima jets, have features that seem strikingly aerodynamic. They have a distinct fuselage, swept-back delta wings, and a tall vertical tail fin. These are all features of modern supersonic jets, not of birds or insects. The wings are perfectly symmetrical and have a sharp leading edge. The tail is a vertical stabilizer, not the horizontal tail of a bird. This observation led to a wild theory these were not animal figures, but realistic models of actual aircraft that the Quimbaya people had seen. Since the Quimbaya obviously didn't have jet engines or advanced metallurgy, the implication was that they were visited by someone who did. This idea was championed by ancient astronaut theorists like Erich von Daniken. They argued that these gold trinkets were cargo cult objects, attempts by an ancient culture to replicate the high-tech machines of their gods who came from the sky. To test the theory, several researchers have built scale models of the Quimbaya artifacts. In 1994, 2 German model aircraft experts, Peter Belting and Konrad Lubbers, built large radio-controlled replicas of one of the most airplane-like figures. They fitted them with propellers and small engines. They found that the models flew perfectly. They were stable, aerodynamic, and even capable of performing complex aerial maneuvers. This was presented as proof that the original Quimbaya design was airworthy. If a scaled-up model could fly, they argued, then the design itself was sound. The mainstream archaeological view, however, is that this is a case of wishful thinking. They argue that the figures are simply stylized representations of animals, most likely a type of flying fish, a moth, or a combination of several creatures. The wings are the pectoral fins of a fish, and the tail is the caudal fin. The culture was known for creating composite animals in their art, blending features from different creatures. The features that look like an airplane's wings and tail are just artistic choices, not engineering diagrams. Archaeologists also point out that out of hundreds of similar gold figures found, Only a handful look vaguely like airplanes. The rest are clearly identifiable as birds, insects, or lizards. The airplane figures are just the most abstract and stylized of the bunch. There is no other evidence of aviation or advanced technology in the Quimbaya culture. There are no runways, no hangars, no engine parts. The entire theory is based on a visual interpretation of a few small, ambiguous pieces of jewelry. The fact that a model can be made to fly doesn't prove the original was meant to. You could probably build a flying model of a lawnmower if you were a skilled enough engineer, but it wouldn't mean that lawnmowers are secretly designed to fly. The Kumbaya airplanes are a fascinating Rorschach test. Some people see a fish, some people see a bird, and some people see a supersonic jet. What you see depends heavily on what you already believe about the ancient past. So, what is it we still can't explain? Why do these specific figures have such perfectly straight, geometric wings and vertical tails, features so different from the more organic shapes of other animal figures from the same culture? If they are just stylized fish, why do they have features, like eyes and nostrils, that are not fish-like at all? Could they represent a real creature that is now extinct, one that happened to have a very unusual airplane-like body shape? Number 8. Why has this 1,600-year-old iron pillar never rusted? In the city of Delhi, India, standing in the courtyard of a mosque complex is a remarkable monument. It's an iron pillar about 24 feet tall and weighing more than 6 tons. It was erected in its current location in the 13th century, but it was originally created much earlier. An inscription on the pillar credits its creation to a king named Chandra, believed to be the Gupta Emperor Chandragupta II, who reigned around 400 AD. This means the pillar is about 1,600 years old, and that's what makes it so amazing. Because for 1,600 years, through monsoon rains and scorching heat, this massive piece of iron has barely rusted. Normally, iron rusts very quickly when exposed to air and moisture. A modern piece of untreated iron would be a pile of orange dust in a fraction of that time. The iron pillar of Delhi, however, stands almost completely corrosion-free. This has led to all kinds of speculation. Was it made by aliens? Was it forged from a meteorite? Did ancient Indian metallurgists possess a secret, lost technology for creating rust-proof iron? For centuries, it was a genuine mystery. It was held up as proof that ancient civilizations had knowledge that we have only recently rediscovered. In recent decades, however, scientists have taken a closer look and have come up with a solid scientific explanation. They analyzed samples of the pillar's metal. They found that it's not made of some mysterious alien alloy. It's made of wrought iron, but it has a very unusual composition. It's 98% pure iron, but it contains a surprisingly high amount of phosphorus. Modern iron making removes phosphorus because it makes the metal brittle. But the ancient Indian blacksmiths who made the pillar used a different process. They smelted the iron ore directly with charcoal. This process left a lot of the phosphorus from the original ore in the final product. And it turns out this high phosphorus content is the secret to the pillar's longevity. Here's how it works. In the presence of moisture, the phosphorus in the iron reacts with the iron and the oxygen in the air. This creates a very thin, very stable protective layer on the surface of the pillar. This layer is a compound called iron hydrogen phosphate hydrate. This microscopic film is only a few thousandths of a millimeter thick, but it's incredibly dense and durable. It acts like a coat of paint, sealing the iron underneath from the corrosive effects of the weather. The pillar did rust, but only for a short time. After this protective layer formed, the rusting process essentially stopped. It protected itself. There were other contributing factors as well. The skill of the ancient blacksmiths was incredible. They forged the pillar by hammer, welding many smaller pieces of iron together. This process squeezed out most of the slag, a waste product of smelting which can trap moisture and promote rust. The dry, mild climate of Delhi for much of the year also helped. And finally, the pillar was traditionally anointed with oil and ghee by worshippers, which would have added another layer of protection. It wasn't one single miracle, but a combination of a unique chemical composition, expert craftsmanship, and favorable environmental conditions. The mystery of the rustless pillar is, for the most part, solved. It's not lost technology, but an accidental masterpiece created by a unique historical process. Still, some questions remain unanswered. How did the ancient smiths manage to forge a 6-ton pillar by hand, a monumental feat of engineering even by today's standards? Was the high phosphorus content a complete accident, Or did they have some empirical understanding that this specific ore from this specific mine produced a superior weather-resistant iron? And are there other lost secrets of ancient technology that are not secrets at all, but simply the result of unique materials and processes that we no longer use? Number 7. What was the purpose of these baffling Roman objects? Across the former Roman Empire, from England to Italy, archaeologists have found over 100 very strange objects. They are all small, hollow, and made of bronze or more rarely stone, and they all have the same bizarre shape, a dodecahedron. That means they have 12 flat, pentagonal faces. Each face has a circular hole in the middle, and the holes are usually different sizes. And on each corner of the dodecahedron, there's a small decorative knob. These objects are known as Roman dodecahedrons. They date from the 2nd to the 4th century AD, and nobody has a clue what they were used for. There are no written descriptions of them in any known Roman text. There are no depictions of them in Roman art. They are a complete and total mystery. This has led to a flood of theories, ranging from the practical to the paranormal. One of the most popular theories is that they were some kind of measuring device, perhaps a rangefinder for Roman artillery. The idea is that you would look through the holes on opposite sides, and by comparing the view to an object of a known size, you could calculate the distance. The different size holes would be for different distances. The problem is, there are no markings or scales on the objects, and the holes seem too random to be part of a precise measuring system. Another theory is that they were a kind of multi-sized gauge used to calibrate water pipes or measure the size of coins. But again, the sizes of the holes don't correspond to any known Roman standards. Some have suggested they were knitting tools for making the fingers of gloves. You would stretch the wool yarn over the knobs. This is plausible, but it doesn't explain why they needed to be so complex and why they were made of expensive bronze. Other ideas are more exotic. Maybe they were toys, like a fancy version of a child's jack, or perhaps they were religious or cult objects. Some have been found in graves, suggesting a ritual purpose. One theory is that they were associated with the Celtic or Gallic religions of the northern provinces, where most of them have been found. They are not typically found in the Italian heartland of the empire. This might explain why they aren't mentioned in Roman texts. They could have been part of a local barbarian tradition that was never written down. Maybe they were used for fortune-telling or scrying. You would roll it like a die, and the hole that landed face up would give you an answer. The knobs on the corners are also a puzzle. They don't seem to have a practical function. They make the object difficult to roll like a die. Some of the dodecahedrons have traces of wax inside them, leading to the theory that they were candlestick holders. The problem with this is that they would be very unstable, and the hot wax would likely spill out of the holes. Every single theory that has been proposed has a major flaw. For every suggested use, someone can point out why it just doesn't work. The Roman dodecahedron remains one of archaeology's most frustrating and enduring puzzles. It's an object we can hold in our hands, but we can't seem to grasp its meaning. What are the fundamental questions we still can't answer? Why are they only found in the northern parts of the Roman Empire and not in Rome or Greece? Was their function so secret or so mundane that not a single person ever thought to write it down? And is it possible that their purpose was so specific to a lost cultural practice, a game or a ritual we no longer understand, that we will simply never be able to figure it out? Number 6, how did the Romans create color? Changing nanotechnology. In the British Museum in London, there is a glass cup that defies belief. It's called the Lycurgus cup, and it was made by the Romans sometime in the 4th century AD. It's a cage cup, meaning the outer decorative shell is carved from a thick blank of glass, a very difficult and luxurious technique. The cup depicts a scene from the myth of King Lycurgus, who was trapped in a tangle of grapevines. But that's not what makes it so incredible. What's incredible is its color. When you shine a light on it from the front, the cup is a murky, opaque green. But when you shine a light through it from the back, it glows with a brilliant, translucent red. It completely changes color. For centuries, no one knew how the Romans achieved this amazing optical effect. It seemed like magic. The mystery was finally solved in the 1990s when scientists at the British Museum were allowed to examine a tiny fragment of the cup under a powerful electron microscope. What they found was astonishing. The Roman glassmakers had somehow infused the glass with microscopic particles of gold and silver. These particles were unbelievably small, only about 50 nanometers in diameter. That's less than 1,000th the size of a grain of salt, They had created what we would now call a nanocomposite material. This is the secret to the cup's color changing trick. It's a phenomenon called decorism, and it's caused by the way these tiny metal nanoparticles interact with light. When light hits the cup, the electrons in the metal particles vibrate. The way they vibrate depends on the size of the particles and the direction of the light. When light is reflected off the surface viewing from the front, the particles scatter the light in a way that makes the glass appear green. But when light passes through the glass viewing from the back, the particles absorb certain wavelengths and transmit others, making the glass appear red. The Romans were practicing nanotechnology 1,600 years before the term was even invented. This discovery raised a huge question: how did they do it, and did they even know what they were doing? It's highly unlikely they understood the physics of nanoparticles. The most probable explanation is that they discovered the effect by accident. They may have been using a gold and silver dust, perhaps from grinding up coins, to color the glass. Through trial and error, they figured out the exact recipe, the precise minuscule amounts of gold and silver needed to create this amazing effect. It wasn't science as we know it, but a form of high craft, a secret recipe passed down from master to apprentice. Even with our modern technology, creating a material with these properties is incredibly difficult. The fact that a 4th century Roman artisan could do it is a testament to their incredible skill. The Lycurgus cup is a true Oopart, but not in the way of ancient astronauts or time travelers. It's out of place because it shows a level of materials science that we thought was impossible for that time period. It forces us to reevaluate what ancient craftsmen were capable of. They weren't just mixing sand and ash, they were manipulating matter at a scale we've only recently begun to explore. The Lycurgus cup is a stunning piece of art and a humbling piece of science, all in one. So what are the big unknowns? Was this cup a one-of-a-kind lucky accident, or were there many more like it that have been lost or destroyed? Did the Roman artisans have any theoretical understanding of why their recipe worked? Or was it purely a matter of craft and repetition? And what other seemingly magical properties of ancient artifacts might be explained by a forgotten accidental mastery of material science at the nanoscale? Number 5. Did a 16th century admiral possess a map of ice-free Antarctica? In 1929, a German theologian named Gustav Deismann was working in the Topkapi Palace Library in Istanbul, Turkey. He was cataloging old books and manuscripts when he found a map drawn on a piece of gazelle skin. It was dated to the year 1513 and was signed by a Turkish admiral and cartographer named Piri Reis. The map showed the coasts of Europe, North Africa, and the newly discovered Americas with remarkable accuracy for the time. But it also showed something else, something that would spark decades of controversy. Along the bottom edge of the map, there was a landmass that looked a lot like the coast of Antarctica. This was a problem. Antarctica was not officially discovered until 1820, over 300 years after the Piri Reis map was made. Even more strangely, the coastline shown on the map appeared to be free of ice. Today, the coast of Antarctica is buried under a mile-thick ice sheet. For the coastline to be visible, it would have to have been mapped thousands of years ago during the last warm period before the current ice age. Piri Reis himself wrote notes on the map saying that he had compiled it from many older source maps, some of which dated back to the time of Alexander the Great, and one of which he claimed had belonged to Christopher Columbus himself. The mystery deepened in the 1960s when a professor named Charles Hapgood took an interest in the map. In his book, Maps of the Ancient Sea Kings, Hapgood argued that the Piri Reis map was evidence of a lost, prehistoric civilization of master seafarers. He claimed that this ancient civilization had mapped the entire globe with incredible precision long before the rise of Egypt or Greece. He believed the Antarctic portion of the map was a genuine depiction of the continent's coast as it was before the ice cap formed, passed down through generations of cartographers until a copy ended up in Piri Reis's hands. He even sent his analysis to the U.S. Air Force, whose cartographers confirmed that the map seemed to show the subglacial coastline of Antarctica with surprising accuracy. This was a bombshell. If Hapgood was right, it would mean that our entire understanding of ancient history was wrong. It would imply a global high-tech civilization existed in the distant past and was then wiped out, leaving only a few faint traces like this one map. The Piri Reis map became a cornerstone of the ancient advanced civilization theory. However, most historians and cartographers have a much more mundane explanation. They argue that Hapgood and his followers are misinterpreting the map. First, the landmass at the bottom is not necessarily Antarctica. It could simply be the coast of South America, which was not yet fully explored at the time. The map makers may have just bent the coastline to the east to make it fit on the parchment. This was a common practice in early maps. The coastline does, in fact, match up reasonably well with the coast of Patagonia in Argentina. Second, the supposed accuracy of the map is often exaggerated. While it's good for its time, it has many significant errors. The Caribbean is distorted, and many islands are missing or in the wrong place. If it were a copy of a perfect ancient map, it should be accurate everywhere, not just in one convenient, mysterious spot. Third, the claim that it shows an ice-free coast is also debatable. The map has no internal details of the continent, just a rough coastline with a few drawings of animals. It's more likely an imaginative guess based on sailors' rumors than a precise survey. The U.S. Air Force's initial positive assessment has since been walked back, with many experts now saying the resemblance to the subglacial coast is superficial at best. The Piri Reis map is not proof of a lost Ice Age civilization. It's a fascinating and important historical document that shows the state of world knowledge in the early 16th century. It's a composite of real exploration, old myths, and educated guesswork. Its real value is in showing us how the world looked to a master cartographer at the dawn of the Age of Discovery, not in revealing a lost chapter of human history. But still, the nagging questions persist. What were the ancient source maps that Piri Reis claimed to have used, and where are they now? Even if the landmass is just South America, how did he map its southern parts so early, and why did he draw it with such a strange eastward bend? And could there be a kernel of truth to the story, a fragment of genuine ancient knowledge of southern lands that was passed down through myths and legends until it was finally drawn, distorted, and misunderstood on this one piece of gazelle skin? Number 4, did 14th century Vikings carve a land deed in Minnesota? In 1898, a Swedish immigrant farmer named Olof Oman was clearing his land near Kensington, Minnesota. As he pulled up the roots of a small aspen tree, he found a large, flat slab of sandstone tangled in the roots. The stone was covered in strange writing. He thought it looked like some kind of ancient alphabet. He brought it to the local town, and it eventually came to the attention of scholars. The writing was identified as runes, the alphabet used by the Vikings and other Germanic peoples. This stone became one of the most controversial artifacts in North American history, the Kensington Runestone. The inscription on the stone tells a dramatic story. It says, translated 8 Goths and 22 Norwegians on a journey of exploration from Vinland through the west. We had camped by a lake with 2 skerries 1 day's journey north from this stone. We were out and fished one day. After we came home, we found 10 men red with blood and dead. AVM save us from evil. On the side of the stone, it continues. We have 10 men by the sea to look after our ships 14 days' journey from this island. Year 1362. If this inscription is authentic, it is revolutionary. It means that a party of Norse explorers traveled deep into the heart of North America in the year 1362. That's over 130 years before Christopher Columbus arrived. We know the Vikings had a settlement in Newfoundland, which they called Vinland, around 1000 AD. But the idea that they traveled 1,500 miles inland to Minnesota in the 14th century is a huge leap. The stone would be proof of a major, previously unknown chapter in the history of the exploration of the Americas. From the very beginning, the stone was controversial. Most runic experts and Scandinavian linguists immediately declared it a fake. They pointed to numerous problems with the runes and the language. They said the shapes of some of the runes were not typical of the 14th century. The grammar and vocabulary seemed too modern, closer to 19th century Swedish than 14th century Old Norse. There were also numbers written in a decimal system that was not used in Scandinavia at that time. The experts concluded that it was a modern forgery, likely created by a Scandinavian immigrant in Minnesota who had a basic knowledge of runes. Olof Oman himself was the prime suspect, but the stone has always had its passionate defenders. They argue that the so-called errors are not errors at all, but regional variations or archaic forms that the experts are not familiar with. They point to the condition of the stone itself as evidence of its age. Geologists who have studied the weathering of the inscription say that it appears to be at least several hundred years old. The fact that it was found clenched in the roots of a 30-year-old tree also suggests it had been in the ground for a long time. The debate has raged for over a century. It's a classic battle between academic consensus and local belief. In Minnesota, the Kensington Runestone is a source of immense local pride. It's displayed in a museum in Alexandria, Minnesota, and is seen as a vital piece of the state's heritage. For the academic world, it's largely considered a settled case, a clever but flawed hoax. Every few years, a new book or a new study comes out, either defending the stone's authenticity or debunking it once again. No one seems to be able to deliver a final, knockout blow to the other side. So where does the truth lie? Most of the evidence points towards it being a 19th century creation. The linguistic problems are just too numerous to ignore. It's possible that someone created the stone as a prank or as a serious attempt to create a piece of local history for the Scandinavian immigrant community. But the mystery of its discovery, tangled in the roots of a tree, and the geological evidence of its age, keeps the debate alive. The unresolved questions are, what make it so compelling? If it's a fake, how did the forger create an inscription that could withstand geological scrutiny for weathering? Did Olaf Omen, a simple farmer, have the deep knowledge of runes and history needed to create such a complex hoax? And if it's real, what happened to the rest of the 1362 expedition? Are there other Viking artifacts buried in the Minnesota soil just waiting to be discovered? Number 3. What on earth is this bizarre, useless-looking stone disc? In 1936, the British Egyptologist Walter Bryan Emery was excavating a large tomb, or mastaba, on the edge of the Saqqara burial ground. The tomb belonged to a nobleman named Sabu, who lived during the first dynasty of Egypt, around 3000 BC. This is the very dawn of Egyptian civilization. Inside the tomb, among the usual pottery and bones, Emery found a very strange object. It was a circular, bowl-shaped disc made of a delicate, brittle stone called metacilstone. It was about 2 feet in diameter, with a central hub and 3 curved blade-like lobes that folded back towards the rim. It looked like nothing ever found in Egypt before or since. This object is known as the Disc of Sabu. The purpose of the disc is a complete mystery. It is incredibly well made. The metacilstone is very fragile and difficult to carve, yet the disc is perfectly symmetrical and finished to a high standard. This means it was an important, high-status object. It wasn't just knocked together by an amateur. But what was it for? It's too fragile to be a tool. It's too impractical to be a weapon. Its shape is bizarre. Some have suggested it was the base of a stand for a candlestick or a vase. But the shape is very unstable. If you place it on a flat surface, it wobbles. It seems designed to be mounted on a central pole that would fit into the hub. This has led to more exotic theories. One idea is that it was part of a piece of machinery. The 3 lobes look a bit like the impeller of a modern pump, or the blades of a turbine. Could it have been part of a water pumping device or a fan? This seems unlikely. We have no other evidence of such complex machinery from the First Dynasty. And the material is all wrong. A fragile stone disc would shatter instantly if you tried to use it as a high-speed mechanical part. Another theory popular with ancient astronaut proponents is that it's a piece of a lost high-tech device. They see its shape and think of a propeller, a flywheel, or even part of an anti-gravity machine. They argue that its aerodynamic-looking shape can't be an accident. They suggest it's a copy, made in stone, of a metal object from a much more advanced technology. The ancient Egyptians, they say, saw this metal object, didn't understand its function, but recognized it as important, so they copied its shape in a material they could work with. The mainstream Egyptological view is much more cautious. Most archaeologists admit they simply don't know what it is. The best guess is that it was a ritual object of some kind. Perhaps it was a model of something else, something whose meaning is now lost to us. The most common theory is that it was a very large and elaborate holder for a ceremonial bowl or lamp, and it was originally part of a larger stand that has not survived. The bleeds would have been purely decorative. This is the most plausible explanation, but it doesn't really explain the very specific and strange shape. Why 3 lobes? Why curved in that particular way? It seems like a lot of very skilled work for a simple lampstand. The Disc of Sabu is truly one of a kind. It has no parallels in the vast artistic record of ancient Egypt. It just sits there in the Cairo Museum, a 5,000-year-old question mark carved in stone. So, what are we left wondering? Why would someone invest so much time and skill to create an object with no apparent practical function? Could it be a symbolic representation of a plant or a celestial object that we no longer recognize? And is it possible that its function was so obvious to the people of 3000 BC that they never felt the need to depict it or write about it, leaving us completely in the dark. Number 2, did Viking myths lead to the discovery of a real navigation tool? For centuries, historians have read the Old Norse sagas, the epic stories of the Vikings. In these sagas, there are mentions of a magical tool called a solarstein or sunstone. According to the stories, Viking sailors could use this stone to find the position of the sun even on a completely overcast or foggy day. This would have been a huge advantage for a seafaring people who often navigated in the cloudy, treacherous North Atlantic. For a long time, scholars thought the sunstone was just a myth, a piece of poetic fantasy. There was no archaeological evidence that such a thing ever existed. Then, in 1967, a Danish archaeologist named Thorkild Ramsku proposed a scientific theory. He suggested that the mythical sunstone could have been a real type of crystal with a special property called birefringence. Certain crystals like cordierite, calcite, or tourmaline can polarize light. This means they split a beam of light into two separate rays. When you look through one of these crystals and rotate it, the sky will appear brighter or darker depending on the crystal's orientation relative to the sun. Even on a cloudy day, there is a pattern of polarized light in the sky centered on the sun's hidden position. By rotating the crystal until the sky appears brightest or darkest, a skilled navigator could pinpoint the sun's location with a high degree of accuracy. Ramsku's theory was brilliant, but it was still just a theory. There was no proof. The big problem was that no such crystals had ever been found in a Viking shipwreck or grave. The idea of the sunstone remained in the realm of educated speculation for decades. But then, things started to change. In 2002, a calcite crystal was found in a shipwreck off the coast of Alderney in the English Channel. The ship was from the 16th century, much later than the Viking Age, but it proved that early modern sailors were carrying these types of crystals on board their ships, possibly for navigation. The crystal, known as the Alderney crystal, was found right next to a pair of navigation dividers. The most exciting discovery came in 2013. A team of researchers led by Guy Ooparts from the University of Rennes in France announced they had tested the Alderney crystal. They found that it was an Icelandic spar, a type of transparent calcite, and they demonstrated that it could be used to locate the sun with an accuracy of within 1 degree. This is precise enough for effective navigation. They argued that this was the smoking gun, the proof that sunstones were real and that they worked. They believe the Vikings, who sourced this type of crystal from Iceland, used them as a reliable backup to their sun compasses on cloudy days. The story of the Viking sunstone is a fascinating journey from myth to science. It's a case where a piece of ancient literature, once dismissed as fantasy, turned out to contain a kernel of genuine historical and technological truth. It's not an out-of-place artifact in the sense of being too advanced, but in the sense of being a piece of technology that was lost to history and only rediscovered because we finally learned how to read the clues in the old stories. We had the myth for centuries, but we only recently found the physical evidence to back it up. But questions still remain. If these stones were so crucial for Viking navigation, why have we not found more of them in Viking Age archaeological sites? Was their use a closely guarded secret known only to a few elite navigators? And how many other myths and legends from ancient cultures might contain similar clues to real, forgotten technologies that we are only now beginning to understand? Number 1. How did the ancient Greeks build a computer? In the year 1900, a group of Greek sponge divers were sheltering from a storm near the small island of Antikythera. When the storm passed, they decided to dive in the area. One of the divers came up talking about seeing a wreck full of statues and treasure. They had stumbled upon an ancient Roman shipwreck. The next year, archaeologists began a salvage operation. They brought up beautiful bronze and marble statues, pottery, and jewelry. And among the treasures, they found a lump of corroded bronze and wood. It was about the size of a large book. It looked like a rock, and nobody paid it much attention. It was sent to the National Archaeological Museum in Athens and sat there for months. Then, one day, an archaeologist noticed that the lump had a crack in it, and inside the crack he could see what looked like a gear wheel. This was impossible. The wreck was dated to the 1st century BC. Complex precision gears were not supposed to have been invented until the 14th century in Europe, over 1,500 years later. This object, which came to be known as the Antikythera mechanism, was completely out of place in the ancient world. It was the beginning of one of the greatest scientific detective stories in the history of archaeology. For decades, scientists struggled to understand the device. It was in 82 separate corroded fragments. In the 1950s and 70s, a historian of science named Derek J. DeSola Price used X-rays to peer inside the fragments. He discovered a breathtakingly complex system of interlocking bronze gears. He counted over 30 gears and proposed that the device was a kind of astronomical calculator. He called it an ancient Greek computer. Many in the academic world were skeptical. The device was just too sophisticated, too modern-looking to be from 100 BC. The real breakthrough came in the 21st century. An international team of scientists, the Antikythera Mechanism Research Project, used advanced technology like 3D X-ray scanning and high-resolution imaging to create a complete digital model of the mechanism. What they found was more incredible than anyone had imagined. The Antikythera mechanism was an astronomical computer of almost unbelievable genius. It had a dial on the front that showed the position of the sun and the moon in the zodiac. It also had pointers for the 5 planets known to the Greeks: Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. The back of the device was even more complex. It had 2 large spiral dials. One was a 19-year calendar, the Metonic cycle, used to predict the dates of religious festivals like the Olympic Games. The other dial was a 223-month cycle, the Saros cycle, which was used to predict solar and lunar eclipses with stunning accuracy. The device even accounted for the variable speed of the moon in its orbit using a clever system of epicyclic gears, a pin and slot mechanism that was not seen again until the work of a 16th century clockmaker. It was a mechanical cosmos in a box. You would turn a crank on the side and all the dials would move, showing you the state of the heavens on any given date, past, present, or future. The Antikythera mechanism is, without a doubt, the single most technologically sophisticated artifact ever found from the ancient world. There is nothing else like it. It completely rewrites our understanding of what the ancient Greeks were capable of. It shows a level of mechanical engineering and astronomical knowledge that we thought was unique to the modern era. The Roman writer Cicero even mentioned seeing a similar device built by the philosopher Posidonius that showed the motions of the sun, moon, and 5 planets. For centuries, everyone thought Cicero was exaggerating. It turns out he was telling the literal truth. The mechanism is not evidence of aliens or time travel. It is evidence of a forgotten branch of ancient Greek technology. It is a branch that was, for some reason, lost. The knowledge to build these devices seems to have vanished during the turmoil of the late Roman Empire. It would take humanity over 1,000 years to get back to the same level of mechanical complexity. The Antikythera mechanism is a ghost of a brilliant lost world. The remaining questions are profound. Who built this masterpiece? Was it Archimedes, the legendary engineer, or another unknown genius from the School of Rhodes? Was this a one-of-a-kind object, or were there many of them? If they could build this, what other incredible machines did they create that we have not yet found? And the biggest question of all, how could such an incredible tradition of knowledge, such a leap in human ingenuity, be so completely and utterly lost to history?